All right, so hello everyone. I'm going to officially start. This is the third data literacy webinar, and we're doing these every 2 weeks on Wednesday, and this is number 3. And so we are talking this week specifically about a key skill in the tool belt of any highly data literate individual, and that is finding and gathering relevant data. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Feel free to comment and add questions as we go along. And I want to set a little bit of the context here. Why am I doing this one so early on in the series? Well, the reason is because this whole series is all about helping people learn the language of data. And so this webinar series is dedicated to that. Also to the side notes, I have a number of links here, and I will put this in the chat real quick here. But there are some links we're going to be going through today. And I took a minute to put those all into a quick little Google sheet that you can click on and see if you want to follow along that way. But the reason why I'm starting and how this fits into the context is, the first of the webinars that we did, which you can find on my LinkedIn channel, my YouTube channel, was all about this ebook around the 17 key traits of data literacy. This attempt to try to define, what does it mean to be highly data literate? And of those 17 traits, they're broken up into knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors. So more than just, what tools you know how to use. It's so easy to default to that and to think about our data literacy in terms of what tools do we know how to use, but it's so much more than that. As you think of individuals you've worked with in your career who you consider highly data literate, and what do they do when they walk in the door? What are their behaviors? How do they feel about data, and how does that relate to how they interact with you and your team and data itself in the company? So that was the goal of the 17 traits. And the first of the 4 behavioral traits is this one right here, this little gear icon. And this trait, again, number 1 of the behaviors was to really focus on how highly data literate individuals utilize data resourcefully. So, this is about seeking it out. It's about creating data. It's about pulling it together and using it, making good use of it, right? It's a resourcefulness trait. And so I really felt that spoke to what it is that we're doing here. And a comment here from Bonnie, also nice to be able to find a data source to interact with. Open source data in healthcare is my bread and butter. Wow, fascinating. Yeah, we're going to talk about open data. Actually, that's a really important topic for us to cover today, finding data about our world. Thanks for the comment, Bonnie. Yeah, open data, finding open data, there's so much of it out there now. We hear that a lot. It's sort of this almost annoying refrain, we're drowning in data, right? So I get that. I've heard that. We've all heard that. But, it is true in the sense that we can't really, show or utilize or demonstrate our data literacy if we don't have data. Maybe seems like an obvious point, but being able to be resourceful enough to go and find and get access to data is huge. All right, so then the second webinar, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, this data working flow. So, being able to kind of process through a thought process to use data to put it to good use. And there was a broader flow chart, and again, a link to that's in this link that I sent out here with all my list of resources that are in this webinar. But this flow chart really at the very beginning, in the very first column, we kind of have to question, we have an observation about the world, and we get to this question where we say, do I have relevant data? Do I have data that applies to this problem or opportunity, or maybe simply just a question? And if the answer is yes, then we're already in the processing flow. But if not, we need to go find it. We need to be able to know where to go to get data to use. And in some cases, we need to actually create it ourselves. It might not exist. And so, someone who's highly resourceful isn't going to let that be the final roadblock that ends their inquiry. They're going to find a way around that, as we're going to talk about in a moment. And there's some good examples of people in the past who have done that, who have been so resourceful that they've gone out and created valuable data sets themselves. Okay, so that's sort of how this fits and why, again, number 3, the third webinar, we're talking about this upfront skill, this resourcefulness, this ability to go and get data to bring to bear to your situation. All right, so what I want to do here is, when I teach data visualization, I sort of follow a 3-step process that actually, to be honest, my students hate me for at the beginning, and I'll tell you why. And then I think they come around in the end. Maybe, I don't know, they like their salad and their greens. I'm not sure, but I do know that it's helpful in the following way. So When I'm teaching them a concept, maybe it's a technique, let's say, for example, how to make an interactive map. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I have a data set for you that I've brought to the class. And I'm going to give you a link to that. And then we're going to make a map together. And I'd like you to follow along with me. And then we'll do step by step. See how this goes. Now do this. Let's talk about what we created. And let's really go through that exercise together. That's step one. Step two is I say, okay, now it's time for you to do the same thing. And so now you're on your own. You need to kind of use those same steps that you've just learned and apply them on your own. So you get the feeling of doing this by yourself, of not having to follow someone else every step along the way. And that's really critical because they own it now and they have to do it themselves. Oftentimes with that, what I'll use is a data set we've created together. So maybe we've surveyed the class, or maybe we've interacted and found a set together right there in the classroom. So then it's more like, now it's more, I'm using data that's closer to me. Do you see what I mean? And I'm also on my own, but there's someone there to help me if I have a question or an issue. Okay, those are all in class, right? That's in the classroom during the session. The third step is really important, and that is that I send them home and I say, you need to now get your own data. And I'm not going to tell you what it is or where to find it. I'll give you some hints and some places to maybe look. But it's really important for you to go apply this skill, in this case, making an interactive map as an example, to your own data. Why? Well, two reasons. One, if you use a technique on something that matters to you, maybe it's your favorite sports team, maybe it's a cause you care about, maybe it's data from your own environment or business or your community, it matters so much more to you. It isn't this abstract thing anymore that I'm going to do a series of steps and the output is going to be some artifact, right? It's more, I'm seeing my world now, and it's about my world. And it's about what data simply being a lens to that world. So it's a critical step, and that's at home. And so it sort of goes from you visualize my data to you visualize our data, and then finally you visualize your data, because it's not just about them remembering it better and it's sticking. That's super critical, but it's also that they learn this critical skill of finding data. And I get emails in the first few weeks of the class, and then every time they say, I'm spending more time finding data than I am actually doing the homework assignment. And so, hopefully then as the course goes along, they feel more and more comfortable and confident finding data. They know where to go. This is a new skill they've learned, right? It's a byproduct of them learning how to create a map, is that they know where to go to find geospatial data on the web. You get it. So again, it's a little bit of tough love. And again, they're a little annoyed at the beginning, I must admit, but I asked them to stick with it, and then they learn this important skill of finding and gathering relevant data. Super important. So we're going to talk about three things in this webinar here. And we're also going to have our guest, Patrick McGarry from Data.World, pop in and talk about how the company that he's working for is making a platform that's helping bridge some of these three components here. But the first one is all about public data. As Bonnie mentioned there, finding open source data that's available to all. Critically, it's very important for us, though, number two, to be able to find proprietary data about the companies that we work in, that we can help our company grow, we can resolve issues, and thereby, apply these skills to our careers, our jobs. So proprietary data, how do you find data in a company context? And then the third part of it is personal data. So if all we did was use our data skill to help companies that we join grow, we would be leaving a lot on the table, right? Because we can use data in our own lives, our health, our fitness. We can use our own data to improve perhaps our finances or organize things. So many ways we can apply data to our own. Why wouldn't we take those skills that we learn in our careers and apply them to better our own situation? So then we'll touch on personal data. And that's going to the personal data piece is going to kind of transition back into the other two as we talk about this general concept of creating data. How does that sound? Does it make sense? So we'll talk about those three components, 1, 2, 3, public, then proprietary, then personal. The types of data that we come into contact with all the time. All right, so first, public data. So it's so amazing how much data we can find about the world we live in. I just finished a portion of my career in which I got a chance to lead the Tableau Public platform. And over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I just saw a dramatic increase in so many new and amazing ways to find data about our communities at the local level, all the way up to global level, and everything in between. So let's talk about that a little bit. And actually, what I want to do is, when we talk about searching online, a lot of times, you think, well, search is search, right? But actually, I love this little grid here from Tamara Munzner's book, Visualization, Analysis, and Design. So she's a good friend of mine. She's on my board of advisors here for this company, and love this textbook. This is the textbook that I have my class read. It's so thorough and a really fabulous overview of the particulars of data visualization, and like I've never seen before. But she mentions this one key concept here in this chapter where, search isn't just search, because there's actually different kinds, and it really depends. Are you looking for something specific, or are you more browsing in general and exploring? Do you know where the thing is and you just need to go get it? Or are you starting from more a needle in the haystack scenario where you really have no idea where a specific thing you want to find is to be found? So that's an interesting concept, right? So if we think about it in terms of just in general, right, search online often starts with Google. And so it's really neat to note that they just in September launched this beta called Google Data Search. I don't know if anybody's heard of it or tried it, but you can see there that link, toolbox.google.com dataset search. And so let's just, for kicks and grins, if you wouldn't mind, I'll bounce out of the slides here. And someone give me a topic. Let's see if I can find which link it. Everybody always gives me a hard time for how many tabs I have open. So totally deserve any and all ridicule there. But I would like to see if anyone, here it is, sorry, it's right in the middle here. Give me a topic, anyone. What's a topic you want to know if Google can find an interesting data set about? Just type it into the chat. I'll probably get 4 or 5 and I'll just try to pick one of them. Okay, violent crimes in the US. Let's start with then beer. Okay, I like that. Let's just try that. Let's start violent crime. Okay. U.S. metro area violent crime rates by type from 1975 to 2005 was one that came out. And this is actually, well, interestingly, it found it on Data.World. It looks like there's also a data set on Kaggle that we can go and find. We'll come back to the Data.World one in just a moment here. Interesting that popped up so quickly. But yeah, you can just bounce straight out of here into the place where you can hopefully, find that data. And it looks like we have some crime rates right away. So that's great. All right, I can't help but try. There was one about beer. Thanks to Lee Feinberg for that. Let's see if Google, what does it find about beer? Who knows, right? So beer production and operations report from data.gov. We'll talk about that here in a minute. The Beer Institute. We're going to talk more. As I said, it's kind of funny there. We didn't chat ahead of time, I swear. U.S. retail sales, so beer, wine, and liquor. How much do people sell? And it looks like maybe you've got other places, Myanmar production, Nepal manufacturing, so many different topics about beer data. There we go. So you can have a field day looking through this Google data search tool for data sets. This is sort of replacing, oftentimes you may know, if you do like on just regular Google, if you do this file type, right? Some people file type, sorry, I can't type file type. And then you can do maybe a CSV and do beer. So this will turn up. I think I might need to do a colon in here maybe. Yeah, there's a way we can enter this in here to just look at CSVs that gives us certain specific file types, and Google will do the search that way. Okay, cool. So that's, Google, obviously a great tool now, really interesting and cool. Oh, I love this one. Actually, my students love it. You may already know about this, you may not. You can do the same thing in Excel, but if you find, oftentimes see beer consumption per capita, here we go, Lee, you and I are on the same wavelength here. So oftentimes you can find data about a topic in a table online. Let's say, for example, and I'll just kind of bounce back into my browser here. Let's say you go to Wikipedia and you find a list of countries by beer consumption per capita. So I've got my URL here. Okay, so I can go into Google Drive, and again, there's a similar function in Excel, but if I just wanted to take that table out of the website and put it into a spreadsheet that's maybe more usable, I can start up a new Google sheet here, and I can just type into A1 equals import HTML. Okay, and then I open a parentheses, quote, put the URL in there. You may know this, but some don't, and they're really excited to find out about it, okay? And then I can put quote table and then the number 1. And then what it'll do is it'll actually go to that website and come back with sort of a cleaned out version. It's not always perfectly clean. Sometimes you need to take it from here and do some further cleaning steps. But it's pretty neat, actually. You can, like, let's say I found this other site here with health expenditure per capita, right? And it's got a bunch of tables For example, maybe it's not inflation adjusted, or maybe it is inflation adjusted. A few different ways to track healthcare spending by country over time. So how would Google Sheets handle the scenario where there's a few different tables on a website? Well, that's what that index at the end helps us with. So if I come in here and replace the beer consumption URL with the so super easy way to scrape the web, really, right? So I can change this number here to pick out the different codes. So if I change this one to 3, I get the code. Let's take a look. Australia with a number of 4493, right? That's going to come over here. That's going to be Australia with 4934. Sorry, this one right here, or actually all the way down here. Yeah. So I can see I can like change this number right here and then get the different tables that are in the data set. And I can pull in, different ones here. This is the purchase parity one here, I believe. So we can change that number. And again, it's just going through the site and looking for the table with a certain index number in the HTML behind that site. So a pretty cool little tool, import HTML. I'll just copy, so there's a question about that. I'll just copy and paste that here into the chat. So a handy little way to go take data off of a website. Again, this is not big data, but this is for an example where maybe you have a lookup table. Maybe you want to pull country population because it's going to help you modify your Google Analytics data to be able to look at, for example, like maybe views per million people to your site. Then you can do that, and you can go get that data right off of a website this way. So super helpful there. Let's talk about some other ways, right? So actually, this is a fun little story. You got kind of laugh at yourself. I'll tell a little funny story about myself. Well, I did get a chance to work with journalists over the last 6 years running Tableau Public, and these people are incredibly resourceful when it comes to getting their hands on data. Oftentimes, they're creating the data themselves from extensive research over months and months and months of compiling lists and pulling data in little by little. A good friend of mine, Christian McDonald, down in Austin, Texas, at the Austin American Statesman. He recently retired, I believe, but one time I met with him, and it was really eye-opening to me to see how much painstaking effort he put into collecting data sets and compiling them himself. Now, oftentimes what a journalist is going to do is this Freedom of Information Act, where they might not be able to find the data anywhere online, but they can make requests of the government to have some data sent to them. I didn't quite go the full FOIA route, but there was a time when I used to live in Southern California when there was this interesting situation where I got 3 tickets in a 1-year span, speeding tickets. Instead of just sitting there saying, maybe I should slow down, which would be the reasonable thing to do, I sort of got this conspiracy theory in my mind, and I said, it happened to be at a time when the California budget was completely in the toilet. It was around 2010, 2009, just shortly after the real estate collapse, and government, state coffers weren't exactly super healthy. And I was noticing these kinds of articles right here, right? Blame the budget. CHP officers issue 200,000 more tickets, right? So, and then this article going on to say how, essentially insinuating that the police force was using tickets to raise funds, so to speak, right? So again, I was sure that's what it was, and I was going to dig into it and find out. So I found this shared services phone number on the CHP site. I think I even created a fake ID. I was all paranoid. It was a whole different thing. For those of you who know me, you're nodding. You understand. But anyway, this is what I got back after like weeks and weeks and weeks of trying. They emailed me essentially a scanned printout in PDF of all the speeding tickets by count. So whether that was a maximum speed, excessive speed, maybe it was a seatbelt violation, all the different categories and types. And so this is what I had in my hands, was this PDF file with literally scanned printouts. So again, open data, not in its finest, but it was there and it was legitimate. So I went about taking a look at it and realized that I use a control chart, which I love to use because it really gives me a sense of if there's a statistically significant trend or not. But in this case, I was seeing that, the count of speeding tickets was going up over time, as you can see, even out of the control limits. But it occurred to me, it isn't really fair just to look at tickets, the sheer count of tickets, right? You need to think about it in terms of, well, there are more and more drivers on the road every year, more people getting registrations and things like that. So went the next step of normalizing it on a per driver basis and found that the trend wasn't exactly as dramatic as I maybe thought it was and frankly hoped it was. So again, I think it was sort of stuck back in my lap to stop driving so fast. But I did find, as I continued to look into the data, that There were some interesting little outliers here, like basically what we call a fix-it ticket. That seemed to be going through the roof, as well as other interesting data points that my conspiracy self hung on to. But that is for a topic for another day. But in any case, this is just an example of spending a lot of time and effort getting data, and then having to really spend a lot of time keying it in. Again, the journalists I work with, specifically this one outfit in Buenos Aires called La Nación, goes to great efforts to take sometimes boxes and boxes of printouts from the government, digitize them, and then all of that to write a story that exposes perhaps corruption, perhaps an issue that needs to be resolved or addressed. So open data. Sometimes it can be tough. You got to be doggedly persistent sometime in following up. But luckily for us, there are, and since that time in my life, back in 2010, 2011, there's just been this massive outpouring of open data, this huge movement in the last half decade where government, especially in this country, government at all levels, state, federal, down at local, are all putting data online. So you can find data about snow plows in Bellevue. I don't think there are any. Maybe you can find data about that. That's, again, another story. But we've had this crazy snowstorm. I don't know if you've heard, but I'm talking to people that have been stuck in their house for a full week, not able to pull their car out. So you all know who you are, and I'm thinking about you. But anyway, I do know the Cincinnati open data portal, which is, by the way, fabulous. If you really want to see a city doing it right, go to Insights Cincy. Oh my goodness, they do an amazing job. They actually have routes of their snowplows and where the snowplows are, and it's really fascinating. But again, governments in the Western world and beyond are putting their data available out there. It's interesting to note, though, right? Here's what happens, though. This is what this site looked like a few weeks ago, during the government shutdown. So essentially the site was turned off. So luckily, again, what we see is that other for-profit and privately funded sites like USA Facts by Steve Ballmer here in Seattle are also taking time to put that data online and give people the ability to access it and visualize it in effective ways. So, so there's sort of this private sector as well as public sector attempt to put data about the world we live in your fingertips out there on the web. So, sometimes though, right, we're not looking for something specific like speeding tickets and really trying to nail something down. Sometimes we just want to explore, it's just like, and this can be for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's just sheer curiosity. I wonder if there's anything interesting out there. Maybe it's because I need to learn. I need to find a certain data set that's going to help me learn a tool. Oftentimes we go that route, right? I think that's not optimal, but we do find ourselves in that situation. Luckily, there are some really cool sites. And again, the link I provided at the beginning of the chat helps you kind of go through that. But here are some fun ones I've seen. So this is one by Jeremy Singervine, who's, I believe, the data editor over at BuzzFeed. He puts out every week, I think. Yep, once a week. He has his Data is Plural tiny letter. So this is just a grab bag of fascinating data sets that they've been playing with, I presume, at BuzzFeed. And they put it out there. Here you go. You can click on one of these links. I think I actually have this browser open. Let me see if I can find it. And, maybe here is this little heart shape right here. Data is Plural by Jeremy Singervine. I want to go into this current one. Looks like it just came out literally just now, but maybe there's some U.S. Forest Service's inventory and analysis program. I can find out about rebel groups and natural resources. Looks like there's a set here about German companies, tobacco, cigarette laws, right? So these are just things that they've been looking at, and you can look at them too. And it's really great because it sometimes gives you this sort of opportunity to dive into a real world data set that maybe, again, wasn't something you were looking for. It was more just a general exploration. Other sites that do that, I don't know if anybody's seen this awesome public data sets repository here on GitHub, but I'll just show you this one. And it's just scrolling for days here, but they've done a fabulous job of pulling together data sets and links to data sets about a bunch of different topics, so I can look in biology, I can keep scrolling down and find links to data about climate and weather. So these interesting, collections and links help us go and find, and we can just more browse, almost like you're in the old days in a library or a bookstore, walking up and down the aisles, just seeing what's there. And there's some amazing things that are there, and some repositories, again, that have really done a great job of collecting and bringing together some sites and places we can go to find great things. I love this one too. There's a couple friends of mine run this, so you may know of Makeover Monday. It's a project that's happening. It's been happening now, as you can see, for about 4 or 5 years now. And so what Makeover Monday is all about is every single week they publish a chart as well as a data set. This is Andy Kriebel and Ava Murray. And so, they're essentially serving up for all of us a data set that we can explore. And when you do that, you publish your example for that week, you can see what literally hundreds of other people all around the world are visualizing that exact same data set. So very unique project, highly recommended. It's great. And what we've seen is some people go through this week by week that are learning a tool, whatever tool it is, and they're taking time to go and apply their skills to these data sets. Again, every time you do that, you find a new challenge, you find a new nuance to the data that maybe you haven't encountered before, and that helps you build even more skills. So what you've got now, though, is this repository of over 4 years worth of interesting data sets that you can go take a look at. So again, just that act alone of them essentially serving up for everyone a data set a week is super valuable, and a great repository exists now. Okay, I want to talk about it, and then we're going to introduce our special guest here, but this is a company I think the world of. I really do. I've met their founders. I've got a chance to visit them down in Austin, Texas, and Data.World. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But I haven't been excited about this excited about a tool since I first discovered Tableau Publics about 7-8 years ago. So this is essentially a platform now, a social network for data geeks like you and me. And so we can go into and create an account on Data.World. Okay, and so this is a little screenshot here from my account. Instead of showing you a slide of it, I'll just show you what it looks like right here live. So if I go into my own Data.World, here I am, right? And so you can see it sort of has a feed, so I can get updates and see what other people are doing, updating sites. I can follow people. You can see people are active on here. It's going to give me my notifications up in the top as well, that I can see new things that have happened. Okay, but I can also upload my own data sets, right? I can put them in there. I can actually create projects as well. There's my beer consumption one. So it's a place for me to add my own data. Now, if I were to go into a data set, let's take this one for example, I can see exactly how many people have favorited it. I can actually even put an interactive graphic in here that allows people to interact with the data. Okay, and then I can put notes in here. We sort of have, a conversation happening about this data set. It's really cool. And then it even goes beyond that. I can actually kind of explore this data, and it launches a special platform here where I can start to create actually visualizations, I believe, using Vega Light right here in the browser using my data. And it goes another step beyond that, which is it actually does a search through the semantic web, trying to find other places perhaps where some of these fields are used elsewhere, so I can join data, and it makes those kinds of suggestions for me. So such a cool platform. Again, really, really a big fan of it and the people running it. So to that end, and the reason why it's a great way to wrap up the public data section is because it bridges the gap over into the proprietary data scenario as well. So it isn't just the open data scenario where they're cataloging data that's available in the public domain. It's also for enterprises and companies that are trying to do a similar kind of a thing with their own internal proprietary data. So with that, why don't I just introduce my special guest here this week. So Patrick, let's go ahead and could you start your video for us and just unmute and just say hello to the group. Let's see, maybe
well, I can unmute myself, but you have to start the video.
Okay, yeah. There you go. I have control of your video. All right, there we go. Okay, so there he is. Hey, Patrick, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Ben?
Doing great. Thanks for joining. And again, it's kind of last minute here. I contacted Patrick. He was busy last week out in DC, and I reached out to him and said, hey, why don't you join? I'm going to talk all about Data.World. Why don't you tell us about it? So maybe could you let the folks on the webinar know a little bit about Data.World, what you love about it, how it's helping, people find and gather data in a variety of different contexts?
Yeah, definitely. Data.World is definitely exciting. We're relatively young as far as things go. We're a venture-backed company. But the exciting part for me when I came here was that we were a public benefit corporation as well as a certified B Corp. So this means that we've baked certain ideas into our charter, things like the proliferation of open data and things like that. So originally when we started just as an open platform. And, wanted to get out there and build community and help kind of aggregate and index the world's data if we could. And then a little over a year ago, we started kind of commercializing the platform with a lot of the lessons that we had learned in the open data community. So and one of the things that we learned was the biggest need was kind of around data cataloging, and people have all of this data, whether it's open data they have access to, whether it's data within their org or data under their desk. And so, as we started to explore this with people, we realized that people have a lot of different definitions of open, right? It can be open to my team. It could be open to a particular business unit, or open to my entire org, or open to the world, which is, obviously what we like to think about as open. But in our effort, we kind of started straddling this gap between open and closed, working with everybody from governments to citizen scientists to industry. It's interesting. You mentioned kind of the governmental data around Data.Gov and some of that stuff. We've had a number of different governmental organizations come to us to run what they called data preservation hackathons, and some of it was very timely because it happened right before Data.Gov disappeared for a while. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, especially the ecological data, people were worried about it living in only one place. Mm-hmm. So whether it's governments or individuals or industry, we found that one of the biggest things that is challenging people is kind of this democratization of data, right? Giving everybody the ability to use the best data possible in their daily lives, not just the daily elite, the data elite, I guess you could call them, anybody. And it's amazing how often people will come to me and say, well, I'm not a data practitioner because I don't write Python code. But I've seen some amazing data gymnastics that have happened in Excel, right? And, guess what? You are a data practitioner. Mm-hmm. So, in doing this, we've there's a great piece that you should read. It's called Data Catalog is the New Black, talking about what it means to start aggregating all of your disparate data resources and, data warehouses, data lakes, relational databases, spreadsheets, flat files, or just pulling the dark data out of the woodwork, like your, coworker that has a Microsoft Access database under their desk, right? And just bringing them into kind of a single pane of glass that you can start not just using them even, but the collaborative effect when I put some data out there for my team, my org, my community, I may have a certain level of comfort with how clean it is or how robust it is. Someone else may come along and say, oh, well, you've done the first mile, but I need it to be cleaner or better. And they'll go and they'll improve your data, and then building on the shoulders of others and not having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time is really important. But even more than the technology or whatever, it's about the people, right? Because you look at collaborative data work or modern data teamwork or any one of a dozen different ways that people label this, and you have to think about what's the biggest part of any of this. It's the people, right? And the chief data officer is kind of the new kid on the block when it comes to the C-suite. And you look at any of the research, whether it's Forrester or Gartner or whatever, and they're talking about like 50 to 60% or more of these chief data officers are going to fail. And more often than not, the common thread between them is we're getting a little bit of feedback here. Somebody.
Yeah, let me mute myself here.
All right, maybe that'll help. Oh, okay, cool. And the common thread between the chief data officers that seem to be having trouble versus those that are shining examples is the ones that are trying to treat this as a technological problem, right? They're looking for that silver bullet. Those are the ones that are going to have a hard time versus those that are treating this as cultural change, because changing people's behaviors is probably the hardest thing to do. So when we think about finding data, obviously we're thinking about all of the different places it can come from, but also asking the right questions, finding the right metrics, and not forcing people to change too much of their other behaviors, right? So at Data.World in particular, we've taken an approach of integrations first. Tool fatigue is a real thing. And so we're not looking to reinvent the wheel for data viz. People like Tableau or Power BI or Google Data Studio do those things well. And allowing people to work in an environment that they are comfortable in. And the only thing you're doing is changing how they socialize the results of that work is a lot easier than saying, here's the new tool chain, relearn everything you knew in a new language or a new format or something else. And so, asking the right questions, finding the right metrics, bringing all your data together in a usable way, and then, think about what you can do to further operationalize your data. Does this mean buying data? Well, there's a big market for that, but hopefully that's going to be changing in that open data and, kind of collaborative data is going to be a lot more of a thing rather than having to buy everything. But also think about bartering. There's a gentleman by the name of Doug Laney who works for Gartner as an analyst. He just wrote a book called Infonomics that is fantastic. If you haven't read it, it's a great, great book. That and Winning with Data are kind of my two banner books around data right now. But Infonomics really looks at what are the economics of data, because a lot of people just think about it as a sunk cost. And so, looking at ways that either your data can reduce the amount of waste in terms of your business practices, or whether you can actually turn it into a revenue stream or several things in between. So yeah, those two books, Infonomics and Winning with Data. If you remember nothing else, I would say remember those. But between those books, many of the authors and a lot of people in the community, we're also actually working together to put together open courseware, which I wanted to mention. And if folks have strong opinions, I would suggest you join me. But datapractices.org, everything from how to ask questions, how to explore your data, how to visualize your data, how to report those kinds of things, or even just how to build a data-driven culture, or how to move from computer science to data science. Like a lot of these things that have been conversations and pieces in blogs and whatnot, we're trying to kind of aggregate all of this collective knowledge into a single place to make our own, I guess, sort of agile movement under the data umbrella. And there's some really great folks that are contributing to it. And I welcome anyone else that would like to contribute to it. So, please provide my information. If people want to jump in, they're welcome to. Right now, it's in kind of a review stage, and we'll be relaunching the site with all that courseware in mid-month.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I will definitely add links to those books that he mentioned into that sheet that I put out there, as well as in the follow-up notes for everyone on the call, and as well as your contact information. So thanks for that. What I love you're doing is putting all of this, taking the big picture point of view and then putting people at the center of it all. To me, that's just huge. That to me is kind of the winning formula. So thanks for joining, Patrick. Wish you all the best. Hang around if you want. Looks like some folks put some interesting comments here you can take a look at there, and feel free to keep chatting with them or drop off depending on what your schedule looks like today. But again, thanks for taking time. Really appreciate it. As I mentioned, what they're doing, right, is beyond just this open data piece, which is huge and so important. But it's, by the way, if you go to Data.World, you can find Patrick at Scuttle Monkey. I just had to mention that. Scuttle Monkey is the name of Patrick's account on Data.World. So go check out what he's got going on there. I've seen some interesting data sets from Patrick already, like blockchain type stuff and some other things there. So some cool things he's also sharing, not just helping run the company, but also using the platform. So yeah, this idea of finding useful and valuable data in your job at a company. Maybe you have something like Data.World. Maybe your company has a repository, a place for you to go. Maybe they have a fully fledged, governance plan in place that allows you to, kind of have access to certain data, but not others. Or maybe you're at a smaller company where it's a little bit more of a free-for-all and you have to kind of fend for yourself a little bit. But let's talk about the company scenario. So, to me, again, there is this interesting thing that's happening right now, because this is such an important need for people to be able to get their hands on relevant data in their jobs. That what we're seeing is this idea of a curator. So what is a curator? We know about it in terms of a library or a museum, right? It's the person who organizes and arranges a showing of objects of interest for people. Well, there's actually nowadays people with a dedicated role of a data curator. Okay, so what's data curation? And this is according to a Wikipedia article about data curation. It's the organization and integration of data collected from various sources, okay? So it could be from different places. It involves, what does this activity mean? Well, it's not just gathering them, it's also annotating. It involves annotation, publication, presentation of the data, such that the value of the data is maintained over time, and the data remains available for reuse and preservation. So it's just almost like, it's the way I thought about it as I researched the topic a little bit, is it's sort of this, almost like this step right here in between the data engineering role of compiling valuable data sources for the company and the data analyst who then takes that data and perhaps conducts analysis and tees up insights for business decision makers or data storytellers who are doing presentations internally or externally. So it's just right over here on the left, data curation. It's almost like you're teeing, almost a mixed metaphors here, right? You're teeing up a golf ball and a tee for the analyst to come and setting it right there for them. Here you go. Here's a valuable data set for you to use. And even not just that, but I've spent some time joining it with another data set from a different corner that's going to increase the value maybe tenfold. So that is what data curation is all about. Now, I think it's pretty rare, right, that people have this. In fact, I asked on Twitter a few months ago, I say, do you have a data curator where you work, someone who sits between data engineers and analysts, whose full-time job is to source, organize, and accelerate high-value data sets? Now, this is not a huge N here. I got 137 votes, but most people, at least people that follow me on Twitter, said no, they don't have that role today, but they sure need one. They're seeing this as this would be such a valuable thing for them in their organization. Someone who really spends a lot of time and energy thinking about how to bring these high-value data sets to the surface and put them in places where people are going to find them. So it isn't always a dedicated role, but it is always, I think, a task or a set of tasks, an activity that someone or a group of people are doing in any company that you can work in, finding that data that's really valuable. So I know in my past, before I joined Tableau, I was in a major medical device manufacturer, and I would become really close friends with the people in IT, who knew where the data was. And I would take them to lunch, coffee, you name it, really. The more closely I was able to work with those individuals who knew the data repositories, the easier it was going to be for me. So this, again, back to the people side of it, build relationships with people in your organization. Take it upon yourself to find out who knows and how you can find out more. Interesting question. Always become close with IT, but what happens when you know more than IT? That's a great question. Yeah, there's a business, there's the IT, there's a back and forth between them. Right in the middle, there is this marriage of great data and great business decisions, and so that needs to be a collaborative thing. And yeah, sometimes there is an imbalance in who knows what or who has access to what. So again, this is why I try to break down those barriers, which is relationships, real relationships with people, face to face, people I knew, right there in my office. Or if it's a distributed office, obviously we can do these kinds of webinars nowadays and teleconferences, but really get to know the people who are close to the data so that I get close to the data. They're really helpful for me, and I learned a lot from that. Also, I found a couple of things are really helpful, and if you don't see these in your company, I would recommend you try them and you advocate for them. So one is, for existing employees. This actually, when I was at Tableau, we did this in the marketing department. There would be meetings on a fairly regular basis called brown bags or lunch and learns, whatever you want to call them, where someone says, hey, I would like to talk to you about a really awesome new data set that we have for our business. I want to tell you about it. I want to show you where you can get access to it. I want to give you some examples of some things that we're doing with it. And it was like, oh, wow, cool. So there was this kind of ongoing and, weekly or monthly discussion around data because it's always changing. There's more next month and the month after that. Maybe some things are sunset, some things get switched or migrated. And so if you don't kind of keep this active conversation going around where the data is, then people are going to either not know or their knowledge is going to become antiquated pretty quickly. All right, so the other side of it is, right, new employees, if they're coming in the door, ask your HR department, if you're a hiring manager, do we train them on where the data is? Do we tell them where to go? Do we tell them how to get to it and what they need to do to get access to it? So these are ways we can get this conversation going, right? It's not just technology that makes it easy for us to search and find things. It's also culture and conversations. It's ways that we can advocate for others, for ourselves. For those of us who are in a situation with a lot of very established rules around data governance, you're your own advocate. If you're talking with your direct manager about data you need access to that maybe you can't get your fingertips on, or if you get to it, you're not given permission to see it, advocate. You're the one that can go say, I think there is a viable and critical business need that I can help with for me if I were to be able to get access to certain data sets. So that's an important thing to do as well. Let me put it this way. This can be tough for data people because this is the relationship side of things. This is, getting up out of your office or your cubicle, walking down the hallway. Those relationships are really important. And again, advocating for yourself, understanding how you can keep the conversation going around data and what's out there. So that's kind of really all I have. I can't really tell you where to go to find data for you right now in your company, but I can definitely talk to things I've seen as being kind of important components or elements of anyone who is going to become highly connected to critical data streams within a company. They're going to have those kinds of things and do that. So personal data, this is almost my favorite part of it, you know. And again, if we took all these amazing data skills and just used them so that big companies can get bigger, wouldn't that kind of be a shame? You know, there's so many things that we can do, you know, to use data in our own lives. So just a couple examples, you know, with the Internet of Things, there are devices. Here's my Garmin Phoenix watch. Notice I have it set to a watch face that looks very much like the DeLorean in Back to the Future. So I had this Garmin watch and it has my GPS. So when I go skiing, you know, this is sort of what my day looks like. There I am right there, and I can see other people that were on the same mountain. And it's pretty cool. It even tells me how many times I went down. Let's see if I can actually, they have this really cool feature. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I had it open a moment ago, but yeah, there's this, my Garmin watch automatically syncs to a Strava account that I have. And so in this Strava account, you know, you can go in there and you can kind of see things you've been doing. You can see what you're up to. You can see things that you've, and so they even have this really cool feature called a flyby. Notice everybody right nowadays is talking about the snow in Seattle. So it looks like I uploaded something here. I managed to, in spite of all the snow, actually take my boys skiing earlier this week. And so, you know, you can see kind of my whole, kind of pathway on the mountain that we went to. And then it's really neat. You can actually even, you know, play through and see me walk into the chairlift, waiting in line, maybe a little too long, maybe a little too long. And then eventually, as you'll see, I'll get on the chairlift. This was a busy day because I think everybody who was stuck, there I go. I'm actually going to the chairlift now. And then I can even turn on other people who were in the same area and see where all these individuals were skiing as well. So again, you know, it's really fabulous, fascinating, and amazingly powerful things we can do with these devices nowadays, which are really cool, you know, ways to kind of see what's going on. I've made a friend connecting with someone that I saw was in my area, and we passed right by each other. I can reach out to that person. Again, have a conversation around the data, you know. So it's really neat. So personal data, I can create my own personal data. I can use devices to help me with that. But it doesn't have to be so high tech all the time, you know. And what I love about these friends of mine, Georgia Lupi, she's on my board of advisors too. So lucky to have the input of people like Georgia. I think I have the book right here, don't I? Yeah, I got it right here. So she has this book. I mentioned it maybe before, Observe, Collect, Draw. Here we go. So sorry, let me advance past the Strava one here. So Stephanie Posavec and Georgia Lupi were creating these postcards going back and forth to each other, creating hand-drawn sketches about their lives. Maybe it was about their mood. Maybe it was about, looks like in this case, it's talking about privacy that they had. Okay, so then they would kind of get to know each other that way. They never met face-to-face, but they were just sharing these postcards back and forth. And then, again, they put together kind of a workbook to let us do the same thing too. So there's a lot of value in such a humanization element of what they're doing, which is hand-drawn data collection and visualizations about our lives. So awesome, such a very powerful thing. And you know, it sort of reminds me of, if we go back in time, people take it upon themselves to create data sets. So, you know, this is Florence Nightingale and her coxcomb plots that helped convince Queen Victoria that there was sanitation reform needed in the hospitals in the Crimea. And you can see the death count here due to, as you go around the calendar here, due to communicable diseases in the gray bar, vastly outweighing those due to mortal wounds in combat. And you can see furthermore, you know, how worse it gets in the wintertime as people are huddled in these unsanitary hospitals. So yes, she was a nurse. Yes, she took care of these soldiers. You know what else she did? She collected data about it. And then she went home and shared it and caused change that way. Same thing with John Snow, you know, the father of epidemiology. So John Snow had a cholera outbreak in the 1850s in a neighborhood of London, went around from door to door, knocking on doors, asking people in each home how many people had died. And he created this map that really helped to pinpoint this one particular pump on Broad Street as being the source of the contamination. Kind of radical in his day when, you know, people thought of diseases being passed through these noxious fumes in the air as opposed to through colorless, odorless liquid water. But it's exactly how it was being passed, and used data, again, getting it himself to help do that. So this really kind of makes me think a lot about my, going back to the company scenario again. So yes, it was about personal data, creating our own data about our lives. But actually, this is very valuable in a company context as well. I spent a lot of time learning the lean methodology, and a core principle of lean is to go to the gemba. And the gemba, Japanese word, basically where the actual spot, the place where things happen. You know, investigators talk about going to the gemba as a crime scene, or Japanese reporters talk about reporting from the gemba, the place where the thing is occurring itself. Getting up out of our cubicles with our computers and files being sent to us and databases we're connecting to, and actually going to the place where all this data is being created and watching it really happen. Maybe it's a manufacturing line. Maybe it's a customer service hotline, putting on the headset, listening in, trying to understand the nature of the issues, talking to the people that are doing this process day in and day out. Such an important, valuable way. I've seen us work well in my own career. We're actually just stepping aside from the digital world into the analog world of what's actually happening with my own eyes and my own ears, and listening as best I can and watching very carefully has caused me to stumble on some pretty amazing breakthrough insights in my career. So go to the Gemba. I love this. If you want to know more about it, again, the link is in the links that I sent at the beginning, but there's a great blog post called No Really, Go to the Gemba. This is the Lean Enterprise Institute, which is James Womack's company, or organization rather, that helps promulgate these ideas of lean. But the idea, right, is that like data is, as you can see in the second paragraph, that data is not enough, right? It's great for trending and thinking long term, but there's nothing to replace the value of really being there in the moments when things are occurring. You speak volumes to the people there that you're working with, and also, again, you open up all your other senses to figuring out what's really happening. And it can cause you to come up with ideas of new data to collect. And maybe you're then going into a data collection plan. Because data can be costly, right? Sometimes we have destructive data. Well, that's a very expensive thing to do. Sometimes we can create data sets, but that actually involves a lot of uncertainty or error or variation. And so there's this whole idea of a gauge R&R, where if you don't know what this is, the Six Sigma concept really helped push this out there, that you need to check how are you collecting the measurements and what is the reproducibility? You and me do the same thing. And what is the repeatability? I get the same result if I do it twice. And how well does that happen or not? And actually studying the measurement system itself to be able to say, how reliable is this data that I'm creating? These are really important things to think about. Just as a fun little example, I like to trick my Twitter followers every now and then. So, and before we get to some questions here in just a moment, but I put out there this fun little banana ripeness assessment. I don't know if any of you saw that. I just kind of said, hey, you're a banana expert and you're going to test the ripeness of bananas. I'm just going to give you a series of photographs. You're the world's foremost expert at testing banana ripeness. And so you can tell me on a score of 1 to 5 how ripe a certain banana is just based on the photograph alone. So I showed them 10 photographs of bananas. And there they are, right? But you notice anything kind of interesting about these 10 photos? If you look carefully, you're seeing some green. You're like, oh, that's unripe for sure. You're seeing some that are brown. That's very, very overripe, right? Some of them kind of maybe, I don't know, in the middle. Notice, though, if you look very carefully, and this is actually in order, 1 through 10, 1 to 5 on the top row and 6 to 10 on the bottom row. Does anybody notice it? Look carefully. Do you see something? What's the trick? I threw a curveball at everybody. I didn't say anything about it. Again, this is not a scientific survey by any means. I just wanted to see what happened. I was curious. If I put 10 pictures of bananas out there, and then I take these two right here. Actually, there's only one repeat. It's this one right here. Number 2 and number 10 are the exact same photograph, just flipped around, so mirrored horizontally. Same bananas, right? Same photograph, just mirrored. And I thought to myself, well, I'm sure maybe, when I first did this, I thought, I bet you maybe 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 10 won't rate it the same the second time. They'll give a rating of maybe ripe the first time, and then next time maybe they're just hustling through the survey and they don't care anymore. I don't know. Maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 10. Do you know that over a third of the people gave it a different rating the second time around? So 37% of these 230 some odd people that took this survey actually rated it differently. And if you get into it, I'm sure we can do a more scientific analysis of this. It was very dependent on the photo before it was a very green banana, okay? And so people tended to give it a higher ripeness score at the end of the survey than they did early in the survey. But the point was just simply, ratings of things. They're ubiquitous in our world, right? We rate books, we rate movies, we rate everything. And people's opinions can maybe also vary. There's some variation, even that kind of a data collection plan where you're assessing experts and they're maybe highly trained. And even then, they may not always give you the same answer twice. So again, some things to think about when you go about creating your own data is how reproducible is first of all, what's a data collection plan? What kind of training or what kind of documentation goes along with it? How are you literally collecting the data? Where is it going? Okay, and then run it through its paces and find out what you get. Study and do some of these little tricks where you throw the same thing twice. And the gauge R&R gives you a very structured way to do that, by the way. But again, this was a quite unstructured way. Wrapping it up, then, this is all about this 15th behavior of continuously improving data, right? So data, their underlying and their associated analyses are always imperfect and incomplete. So a key behavior for anyone who's highly data literate, knowing that, I can also find and gather relevant data, create data, but then taking it the next step like we've talked about. And, it's really about improving upon it and helping that data get better and better. So as Patrick mentioned also, then others in my organization can benefit and take it even a step further than maybe I've taken it. And then we can, in that sense, build on the richness of this resource together. All right, so 3 components: public, proprietary, and personal. 3 kinds of data that we can find, that we can gather, that we can create. We can get into the flow of interacting with other people in a world where data is, a lens that we can see the world. It's a resource for us to create value and for us to extract insight. So key skill. Got a couple minutes left here. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. I hope this was a fun one for you. It was a fun one for me to put together. I love finding interesting data sets. So if you know of some cool places to find open data, feel free to put them in there in the chat. If you have any questions for me, we end up with a couple minutes. I can maybe answer 1 or 2 if anyone has any questions about finding and gathering relevant data. But if not, again, just thank you to everyone. Oh, one thing while you're thinking about maybe if you have a question or not is next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks from today on the 27th of February. And thanks to my son, Aaron, for this graphic here. He's snowed out and can't go to school, so he did some Photoshop work for me here in the office yesterday. And so next one's going to be all about this really awesome concept of exploring the contours of your data. If you've never heard what that means, then join in 2 weeks from today, noon on the 27th, where we're going to talk about this really critical step, okay, of being able to understand the boundaries of your data before you actually use it to answer a question you've got. All right, so thanks to the folks that are saying thank you. Question here from Edward: as a front-end engine, I really enjoy 538.com for ideas and breadcrumbs to data sites. Yeah, and I think a lot of times now these news organizations are creating their own GitHub repositories of their raw data, which is so awesome. Special thanks to Patrick for joining in before we wrap it up. And yeah, with that, I will say thank you. When does dataliteracy.com go live? Oh my gosh, the ball is on the 2-yard line, 1-yard line maybe. It's going to be going live here in the next, give me about a week or 2. We're in the final phases of the last pieces of content. I'm actually looking forward to it. I got a little explainer video animation that goes along with it. So I'm having fun with this website. I will tell you all about a super talented web developer here in the Seattle area who has just been doing a fabulous job for me and his whole team. So yeah, take a look for that to come soon. Okay, thanks everyone. Take it easy. Look for the recording. I'll send the link to the YouTube link. If you think other people would benefit from this webinar, just send it to them. It's free. They can just click it and watch it. And then, of course, leave comments there on YouTube or like it if you wouldn't mind, and that will help me grow this channel. And with that, we will talk to you again online, wherever you may be. Again, joining in maybe hopefully in a couple weeks' time. Thanks, everyone, and bye-bye.